and the French leader Francois Hollande. First, though, on the program, live in the studio with me, we have Cabinet Minister for Resources in Northern Australia, Josh Frydenberg. Minister, thanks very much for your time.
Nice to be with you.
Before we get on to economic matters and domestic matters, I want to get your reflections on this development on the Turkey-Syria border. A real concern, given now we've got a NATO country shooting down a Russian jet.
Well, this is the most serious incident between NATO and Russian forces in nearly half a century, and I think both sides agree how serious it is. I noticed President Obama has called for calm, and that's absolutely right, and I'm sure Julie Bishop is monitoring very closely the situation. But with so many different countries' aircraft over that particular area, you can get a miscalculation, and the Turks say that the Russian plane was over its area. There's reports that a pilot has been captured. So I'm sure this story is just at its beginning.
Well, this was the whole concern about the Russians entering the fray in the first place, about a possible clash with the United States fighter jet or an Australian part of the coalition. But now we've seen the Turks react with aggression to bring down this jet, and obviously it's unknown how this is going to unfold. Very hard to predict.
It is hard to predict, and I noticed that international financial markets took a bit of a shock, saw it as a bit of a shock last night, but seemed to calm down by the end. President Obama has also said that the Turkish government has a right to defend its own territory, but it just shows you how fluid, how dynamic and how dangerous the situation is. As we know, the Russians have been the victims of Islamic extremism as well, with the downing of one of their planes over Egypt recently.
It's a reminder of the complexity of the whole theatre, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In the context of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, saying that we don't need machismo right now. It's about being calm and decisive in what we do, but not reacting hastily. Do you accept that, or is it time now to be sending in ground forces and at least special forces, as the former Prime Minister argued and the former Defence Minister argued?
Well, the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is absolutely right to reinforce that we have to be very measured, have to be very considered, we have to be consulting with our partners. We already are making a very significant contribution in that theatre, with the second largest contribution behind the United States in Iraq. We have our aircraft there, we have our personnel there, we're training the Iraqi forces. So nobody could criticise the Australian government for not taking significant and appropriate steps to do its part. But this is an international effort. We can't afford to lose this battle with Islamic extremism, and what is happening in Iraq and Syria is at the heart of the problems that we're feeling here at home.
Do you see there's any scope, though, any prospect of Australia sending special forces as part of a combat mission if Obama does go down that path? Can you see that as a likelihood?
Well, look, these are issues that the National Security Committee of Cabinet, led by the Prime Minister, will decide. I'm not part of that committee, and it's not appropriate for me to comment, other than to say I have great confidence that the government will act upon the best possible advice from our defence and intelligence and law enforcement agencies, whether it's in relation to our deployments abroad or whether it's in relation to the measures we take at home to deal with the rising threat from Islamic extremism.
The Prime Minister says everything he's doing is based on trying to minimise the risk to Australians and taking the advice of agencies, the Defence Force and so on. With that in mind, on what basis then is the suggestion by Kevin Andrews, Tony Abbott and others that we send in special forces, if it's not the advice of Defence?
Well, look, as I said, I am very confident that the National Security Committee of Cabinet is taking all the advice possible and is consulting closely with our allies and will make the right determinations, and that includes what we've already deployed as opposed to calls for further deployment. And I think what Malcolm Turnbull made very clear yesterday was the significance of the threat here at home. He pointed out there's been 26 arrests since September 14 related to counter-terrorism. That's more than a third of the arrests that have been made since 2001. We know when Afghanistan was the global headquarters for terrorism, Kieran, that 30 Australians went over there, about 28 of them came back here, or a bit less than that. Then a number of them re-engaged in criminal activity here, terrorist-related activity. Some of them went to jail. And now we're seeing 110 Australians who are over in Syria and Iraq, with already more than 40 who have been killed. And the significance of this threat posed by Australians going off to the theatre in Iraq and Syria is even greater than we saw with Afghanistan.
What's your view of the contribution made by some of your colleagues in this debate, those are traditionally supporters of Tony Abbott and Mr Abbott himself? Is that helpful to have this discourse on the military deployment? Is that just part of the democratic debate, or does it hamper the government's message?
Well, look, I think people understand it's the Prime Minister, it's the National Security Committee of Cabinet that has the best possible advice and that have the responsibility in our parliamentary system for making the determinations on behalf of the Australian people. They're the ones who should be making those decisions. They're the ones who are receiving the best, most timely advice. And I think we should look to them for their commentary and for their leadership, as opposed to others.
You were in Europe recently, and Paris. What's your sense of the ongoing reaction there? Francois Hollande has been in Washington overnight for talks with President Obama. He's seeking to generate momentum in this battle against IS. But in terms of the implications for Europe, the European project, open borders, what's your guess on how that unfolds? Will we see tougher border security into the future? I
think you will. I think this is an extremely significant development with the tragic killings in Paris just over a week ago. I think Francois Hollande is seized of the situation. Certainly the French population at large are demanding from their government tougher action. We had the Charlie Hebdo killings and at the kosher supermarket in January of this year. The tone after that from the French government was different, more conciliatory to what it is today. I think they realised that the European experiment, as you referred to, the European project, does need some refinement. You can't have the easy passage between countries without appropriate security checks. You can't have the easy movement of arms being trafficked without a greater clampdown. And I think Francois Hollande facing regional elections in just a few weeks' time with Le Pen and with Sarkozy making very strong comments, I think the pressure is on him to deliver. As he said, France is at war, and they will be merciless in their response.
And when you look at the whole situation, Molenbeek, that suburb of Brussels, that the Belgian authorities look like a very much a weak spot in this fight or counter-terrorism effort to allow such a hotbed of radicalisation to fester. It seems hard to fathom really in the current climate, but that's exactly what's happened.
Well, there's been a clear problem of integration there with Muslim migrants over the years, and there are suburbs in Paris where the police just don't go, Kieran. And I don't think you can accept that in any country, let alone at the heart of a European capital. So this is of great concern to not just the authorities in France, but also to the authorities in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in, of course, London, in other capitals where there's equal concern about the rise of Islamic extremism.
Let's look at a few other issues now. As a minister in an economic portfolio, former assistant treasurer, the Harper Review response. We saw, for example, if we look at the reaction of the states and the behaviour of the states, WA, for example, has been criticised for not undertaking enough reform at the state level, riding the mining boom and then complaining about a lack of GST. Is that the sort of thing that the response to the Harper Review is seeking to deal with?
Well, Scott Morrison made very clear yesterday that this will be a national effort, that he'll be sitting down with his territory and state colleagues in December to nut out further details about these competition reforms. But they're partners in this national project, and we have seen productivity being slower than it could have been. We have seen a slowdown in commodity prices, and we do need to re-energise the Australian economy. And clearly, Harper's Review and its recommendations, 56 recommendations, 44 of which we've accepted either in full or in part, with further consultation on a number of others, can actually provide that stimulus. And if you look back to the Hilmer reforms in 1993, it led to 2.5% increase in GDP.
And so some of it was in some of the areas that they're looking at the state level, where some of the states haven't undertaken as much reform as, say, states like Victoria, is the energy sector. You're Minister for Energy. How much scope is there in that sector alone?
Oh, there's a lot, and Western Australia can be part of the national electricity market. We see real opportunities for efficiency, for reform, and I'll be bringing the state and the territory energy ministers together in the first week of December for a COAG meeting where we'll actually progress a number of these changes. But if Western Australia, for example, around retail trading hours, or Queensland, were able to adopt some of these reforms, I think there would be certainly better economic benefits for the nation as a whole.
Minister Frydenberg, appreciate your time. Thank you. We're going to take our viewers live to